Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to News Dose, and the excuse train seems to be rolling on high steam right now. Yeah, there's been some rumblings within the game industry these past few weeks about shadow launches and how it's unfair for the rest of the game industry that are unaware of said things. And now this conversation is going mainstream because of one studio that had some particularly harsh words for Team Cherry. So we're going to get into all of that and whether or not they have a point. Now, we'll also talk about a PlayStation leak because some of their future pipeline just leaked out. First, though, I do want to thank my supporters on Patreon and on YouTube memberships. Thank you just so much for what you do, and you will receive this video through early access. Let's go and get right into things, though, starting off with Xbox Game Pass and its second wave of September games. This includes 13 titles, and we can see them here. There's Hades, which really, perfect timing here for its soon-to-be-released sequel. There's also Visions of Mana, Deep Rock Galactic Survivor, SOPA, Sworn, Endless Legend 2, Frostpunk 2, Peppa the Pig World Adventures, Wobbly Life, Lara Croft Guardian of Light, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, For the King 2, and Overthrown. Now, do pay attention to which games are available for which tier, but obviously the big inclusion here is Peppa the Pig. I mean, we're talking about an all-time great here. Okay, maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but seriously, I'd say this is a fairly solid lineup. Maybe not the best for day one launches, but Visions of Mana, I think, is a great inclusion. Unfortunately, it wasn't very successful when it first released last year. The studio behind it actually got shuttered shortly after its release, but it's described as a fairly solid JRPG, and it's the first entry in the Mana series in a very long time. So I'd say if you're a fan of that franchise, and if you still haven't played it, then this will be a good opportunity to check it out at no extra cost. I mean, it's still $60 digitally, which is kind of crazy to think about. The physical copy can be purchased for around $30, so all the more reason to support physical games, just saying. But nonetheless, I do think that this is a solid inclusion for Game Pass. I'd also recommend Hades and Frostpunk 2 for anybody who hasn't played those, especially Hades. It's a heavily praised game for a very, very good reason. One of the best independent games that you can play. But really, one of the biggest announcements for Game Pass is that Ultimate and PC subscribers will get an early access open beta for Call of Duty Black Ops 7 on October 2nd. So Microsoft is starting to position Game Pass as the go-to platform for Call of Duty fans, and we'll see if that can further increase their subscribers here over the next few months. Now, speaking of Call of Duty, though, let's go and talk about its competitor this year being Battlefield 6. There's actually a lot of optimism for this year's entry. Its beta was well received, and so far it seems like they might actually deliver a great Battlefield experience. And I mean, I'm crossing my fingers that they can. It's been a long time since we've gotten a truly great Battlefield, and truthfully, I think Call of Duty really needs the competition. Activision has been, I'd say, a little complacent without Battlefield breathing down its neck. So I think this could potentially be great for both Call of Duty and for Battlefield fans alike. As I always like to say, competition breeds excellence. I think it's very important for the industry and, in this case, for these two particular games. But I digress. One thing that we don't know about Battlefield 6 is the release date for its Battle Royale mode. However, that may have just changed because according to Modern Warzone, who has previously leaked Call of Duty and Battlefield information, claimed this online. Sources: Battlefield 6 Battle Royale is currently planned to launch on October 28th, 18 days after the launch of the game. This date is subject to change as always, especially with the BR currently in testing in BF Labs, but I've heard it is the current plan for launch. Now, I mean, you have to kind of keep in mind that this is only a rumor, but if it turns out to be true, that's a much quicker rollout than I think most people are expecting. It was previously rumored that it wouldn't launch until early 2026, but I mean, I wouldn't be all that surprised if EA wanted to push for 2025 to really capture the holiday audience. Now, hopefully they don't rush it out prematurely. That would be a bad thing for them to do. But, just kind of knowing how these big companies operate, I mean, yeah, I'm sure that they would much prefer a holiday launch. And if they can do that, then they probably will. All right, now let's go and get into the big story of the day. And this is regarding Hollow Knight Silksong, which really seems to have the game industry shook. I mean, previously we were hearing rumblings about how game studios were frustrated about its cheap $20 price because it kind of makes their more expensive games look bad. I mean, which personally I think is kind of hilarious. Somehow the industry has found a way to paint Team Cherry as the villain for being, I guess, too consumer friendly. I just think that speaks volumes about how the game industry operates. But nonetheless, the latest talk of the town is that game studios are also frustrated by Silksong's surprise shadow launch. Now, we had previously heard quiet whispers regarding this exact topic. I want to say about 2 weeks ago, because at the time of Silksong's release date announcement, a lot of studios decided to delay their game, and they reportedly weren't happy about that, which, I mean, I can understand that. It is probably a little annoying to have to delay your game last minute. At the same time, I'm not going to necessarily put that on Team Cherry. Ultimately, each studio has to decide what's best for them. But now the Hell Is Us creative director is making his feelings public because he said, when you know you're that big, I think a shadow drop is a bit like, wow. As the GTA 6 of indie, to shadow drop something like this is a little callous. So in other words, he's basically accusing Team Cherry of being selfish towards the rest of the industry, and that it's even negatively impacting their very own game, which launched on the same day as Silksong. And that right there is where I have to kind of stop this conversation for a moment, because this, to me, comes off as nothing more than an excuse. And I say that for a few different reasons. One is that I don't think the Silksong's release date was nearly as surprising as some of these studios like to claim. Yes, they didn't have the exact release date, and okay, I do understand how that could be a little annoying because it holds up your own plans, but they had to have at least known that September was a possibility, because not only were there leaks that pointed to a soonish launch, but time and time again, it was reiterated that it would release sometime in 2025, and there's really only a few months left of the year. So with that in mind, I imagine most studios were probably aware that it could have potentially released in September, and that they might, yes, need to make a last-minute change. In fact, the Hell Is Us studio could have done that themselves, which I think would have probably been the smart move to make in this case. But ultimately, they decided not to do that. In the same interview, he said that they had a conversation in whether they should delay Hell Is Us or to keep its release date, in which that's what they decided to do because they believed, in their words, that they could weather the storm. So that's a decision that they made on their own. That's not Team Cherry's fault. And unfortunately for Hell Is Us, it seems like they either overstated how much hype there actually was for it, or maybe they just understated how much hype there actually was for Silksong. And that's the thing for me, because even before Silksong's release date announcement, there didn't seem to be a ton of online chatter for Hell Is Us leading up to its launch. And I'm just going to kind of speak for myself here. Even if it wasn't for Silksong, Hell Is Us was not exactly on my radar as a must-pick-up game at launch. And that's where things really take a turn for them, because Hell Is Us didn't exactly review all that well either. It has a 77 overall score, which I'm not saying that that's bad. I have heard some good things about it from fans, but for a new IP, a 77 doesn't necessarily help us stand out. And I'm going to go and compare this to a shadow launch from just earlier this year, being Oblivion Remastered. I mean, if you remember right, it released during the same week as Expedition 33. And there was a lot of talk about that, especially considering that was an Xbox shadow launch and, Expedition 33 was a part of Game Pass. I wasn't thrilled by that decision, but ultimately, both games ended up being very, very successful. In fact, Expedition 33 has since sold 4.4 million copies, which is absolutely amazing. So, how come that game can find success despite a very hyped up shadow launch near its release date, yet Hell Is Us can't? And I think we all kind of know the answer to that question. Expedition 33 was insanely well received and it stood out, whereas Hell Is Us, it hasn't stood out. So to me, and this is only my opinion, but if they want to complain and use Silksong as some kind of scapegoat as to why their game hasn't been super successful, then they should have just delayed their game rather than complain after the fact. I mean, again, I understand that it was probably annoying for some of these studios to make a last-minute change, but ultimately, each studio has to take things like that into consideration and then make their own decision to give their own game the best opportunity. And this was the decision that the Hell's Us studio made themselves. They could have delayed it, but they decided not to. Now, that's only my opinion, and maybe you feel different about this. And if you do, let me hear it in the comments below. Do you think Team Cherry was in the wrong or not? All right, now, one more thing before we go. Some of PlayStation's pipeline leaked out a bit early, or to be more specific, Insomniac's pipeline. I mean, we've known for a while that they're working on a new Wolverine game and also a new Venom title as well. The only thing is that we don't know when they'll actually release, but according to a new leak, we now have a better idea. This is according to MP First, who reported that the most important information we received from our main source is that Wolverine is still on track for a 2026 release, and Venom has been in active development. While we haven't been able to determine how advanced the Venom project is, if we assume Wolverine remains the priority, it's likely that the game is still in pre-production, which, if that part's true, I think that's a little bit surprising. I figured Venom would be out a bit sooner, but it's starting to sound like it's going to be a 2027 or even a 2028 release. However, it's increasingly sounding like Wolverine will be PlayStation's big 2026 game. I mean, keep in mind here that Sony previously said that they'll have at least one big game every year, which, I mean, I kind of think that that's a low bar for them, given their past pedigree, but, nonetheless, we should see Wolverine sometime soon. There were already some rumors going around about it being revealed sometime this year, maybe even as early as this month, and I'd say this information kind of leans into that idea. Sony will likely re-reveal it sometime soon with a 2026 release window, and then next year, they'll slowly roll out more gameplay and some deep dives like they did with Ghost of Yotei this year. Either which way, though, that's at least one PlayStation-developed game for 2026, and, I mean, I hope there's more, but Wolverine, I know there's a lot of people that really likes that franchise, and hopefully it'll turn out to be good. Anyways, though, that's going to be it for this episode, but until next time, make sure to subscribe, ring that bell, and peace out.